Alright, I've got a piece of paper. In fact, I've got two pieces of paper. And we're going to create something like this just to show you how to make these different line types, how to make construction lines, dimension lines, cutting plane line, hidden and center lines, and the different line patterns. We got hidden lines, phantom lines, and center line patterns. And I'll also demonstrate the use of some of these tools. So what I have here is a couple of sheets of paper. And these two sheets of paper just to provide a little bit more of a cushion to draw on, so you don't get the texture of whatever you're drawing on. If you have a table at home that has a grain to it or something, you don't want that texture to come through. I have a mechanical pencil. It's number 7, .7 lead mechanical pencil. I've got a scale of some kind. Mine happens to be an architectural scale. And I've got a rolling ruler, which is one of my favorite tools to use in drafting. It really is one of the best things to have as a drafter or technical illustrator, whatever you're doing, because it allows you to draw more quickly if you use the tools right on there. So let's begin. First thing I'm going to do is assume my sheet of paper is square, and I'm going to establish my first line. So I'm going to take my scale first and measure over there we are. I'm going to measure over 1.5 inches from the edge of the paper in 2 places. And the reason I'm doing that in 2 places is that will ensure that when I line up my straight edge, that the straight edge, when it's lined up with those 2 dots I created, is going to be parallel to that edge of the paper. So I'm going to use my first technique I'll show you to draw construction lines is to hold the pencil as lightly as possible. So I kind of hold it from the end like this and drag it across the paper, because that's what ensures that the line weight itself is going to be as light as possible. So you can see, we can see that. We can barely see it, but we can see it enough to give us some guidance when we're drawing out the rest of the drawing. So now that we have that first line established, I now want to create a perpendicular line to that one. And I'm not going to worry too much about measuring it all yet. I'm just going to take this rolling ruler, and this is where the rolling ruler really comes in handy, is the center of the rolling ruler is a protractor, and I can measure 90-degree angles by lining up that line we just drew with that 90-degree angle position. So I've got it lined up like this, and I want to see that the line is lined up with 90 degrees all the way through like that. And then I know then that this line I'm going to draw as a construction line as the start point for my horizontal line work is going to be perpendicular to the original line. So we keep going back to that original line. It's going to ensure that your stuff ends up being a lot more parallel and perpendicular if we do that. Now I'm ready to measure. So if I don't have a rolling ruler, and by the way, if you don't have a rolling ruler to measure something perpendicular, you could do this with a triangle. You just have to be really careful to line up one edge of the triangle perfectly with the first line that we drew, and then you can figure out, you know, okay, that's perpendicular to that line. So if you have a triangle, you can do it that way. This is where I think the rolling rulers pay for themselves. So let's measure, and I can use the rolling ruler itself to measure. Let's measure over from the original line that we drew, the original vertical line. I'm going to line up the edge of the rolling ruler so it's lined up with the 0 here, and then just to make a mark at the 4-inch mark, because there's a little hole next to the 4-inch mark that I can just dot right inside of it. Then this is the beauty of the rolling ruler. I slide it down, and as long as I just pay attention, is it staying in line with that original line that I have? And if it is, you can go ahead and make a second mark on that 4-inch mark again, and now I have 2 lines that I can use to line up my straight edge or my parallel to make it parallel to the first line. And then again, I'm going to draw a construction line. So then we'll go in the opposite direction. I want to line up this straight edge, or my parallel, my rolling ruler rather, so that the 0-inch mark here is right on top of that line I started off with at the bottom. And then locate the 4, put a dot inside that 4, roll it back. It got stuck on something here on my desk, so it didn't stay straight. So let's line it up with the first one. Roll it back, ensure that it's staying on that line, and do it again. So now I have 2 dots to line up my rolling ruler and make sure it's staying parallel. And you can test your rolling ruler to see if it's staying parallel. That's perfect. See, that lines right up with those 2 dots I created by me lining it up first with the first horizontal line, and then I know that things are staying parallel and perpendicular. So now I've got these really light construction lines, and they tell me everything I need to know in order to place my actual object lines. Now down here I'm going to add another feature. I'm not going to bother measuring it, but we'll pretend that it's a certain size and I'm measuring it very carefully. But for speed's sake here, I'm going to put in the construction lines, and that's a design feature of this part. So I'm going to end up drawing my object lines and that keep that notch in there. So now to put the object lines in, because I'm right-handed, I'm going to start off with my straight edge from the top of the sheet, working my way down, because you're going to smudge less. So these are the little tips and tricks you get from a drafter. So once I get it lined up with the top there, I'm going to position my pencil so it's at a perpendicular angle to the page. I know it's hard to see that, but like I want it literally straight up and down like that if you're looking straight down at the pencil. And the reason for that is the lead is 0.7 millimeter. If I want a 0.7 millimeter line consistently, that lead has to stay straight up and down to do that. So position your straight edge where it ought to be. Position your lead holder right over the intersections of the 2 construction lines. And notice that I'm pulling towards my right hand. That's the way that I draw. I go from left to right. If you are left-handed, you would go in the opposite direction, like this. Avoid pushing the pencil. Pull the pencil instead. It's going to result in a lot less breakage. So now that since I'm already in this horizontal position, let's mosey on down to the next construction line I have that's also in a horizontal position, which happens to be this feature right here, and put in that feature, and I know exactly where to start and stop that line because of my construction lines, and I'm not worried about it. And then we'll roll it down even further to the last horizontal line that I have and draw that line across. So now I've got the consistent line weights for all my horizontal lines. I'm going to switch my straight edge to a vertical position, and starting from left to right, because again you're going to smudge less. If you're going this way, you're going to start smudging the lines you've drawn over there on that side. This is especially important when you're inking and you need some time for the ink to dry. So and I pulled the pencil towards me again, not pushing it away from me. I'm going to go to the next vertical line I can use, and using the construction lines here. So I've got construction lines that show me exactly where to position my lead and then where to stop it. And then the last line that we have here from those intersections. So those construction lines are driving where I end up putting all that line work. So the instruction line step is extremely important. If you do them correctly, you don't have to go back and erase them. It's perfectly acceptable to see kind of the construction of this drawing as it goes forward. So now we've got all of our object lines, let's say, created. We're going to create some hidden lines. So hidden lines are thin, and what that means in mechanical is that we still want it to be a dark line. Dark and thin or dark and thick are not the same things. Thick means the width of the line, but how dark it is how much of the lead you're really pushing down and making sure it shows up nice and sharp and darkly on the page. this is a light line and it happens to also be thin. Light means it's barely visible to someone that isn't right on top of it. So if we were to look at this drawing from about, arm's length away, we can't really see those construction lines. But I'm right on top of it. I'm the actual creator of this drawing. I want to be able to see those reference lines if I'm close to it. So a thin line is supposed to be dark still, but thin. It should be definitely different looking than the object lines. So I'm going to show the technique up here. Here's a thick line. And then here's a thin line, and you'll see that I'm going to use a different pencil holding technique. I'm going to roll the pencil and drag it against the straight edge to try to create a line that stays thinner but still is just as dark as that line. And you can see there's a difference in line weight there when I'm done, and that's a thin line. Now this is very difficult to do and also try to create a pattern at the same time. So this is where we end up, oh, I hate it when I do that. Those were both out of shot, weren't they? But there's your thick and thin line. Let me demonstrate that again. So here's your thin line, rolling it like that. It creates a thin line, and then here's a thick line. Straight up and down. Always straight up and down for a thick line. You can see the difference in line weights somewhat, okay? So to create a thin line, that's a hidden line, for instance, I'm not going to bother with the pattern. I'm going to first of all draw that line out as a continuous line, and I'll do that in two spots. We'll pretend we're looking at a hole from the side. And then I'm also going to draw in the center of this a center line. I'm not worried about the line pattern yet. I'm just drawing where those lines belong. And obviously I'd be a lot more careful about placing these lines. I'm kind of eyeballing things right now. Pretend that's in the center. But we're looking at now this is going to be two hidden lines here, and this is going to be a center line. So to turn it into hidden lines like magic, we're going to use that eraser. And if you have an eraser shield with the dot pattern that goes across, this is a great tool to use to make sure that these hidden line segments are exactly the same distance apart. I kind of eyeballed that. That came out pretty good. We're going to do the same thing on the other side. So a hidden line pattern is a series of short dashes. So just about every 1/8 of an inch or so, it looks like, I'm erasing a little bit of the line segment to create that hidden line pattern. And that looks pretty good. The center, this is a center line, and it extends beyond the object lines because it's not representing a feature as much as it's representing a theoretical center of the feature itself. So this is representing the center of this hole. If it was being drilled in from this direction, we haven't looked at this view, so we can't see the true shape of the hole. But if we were to draw a view over here and show where that hole is, we'd see a circular feature of that hole, and then we'd see a center mark on it. This is representing that side view of that hole in the center mark. So a center mark is supposed to be a long dash, a short dash, a long dash, a short dash, and repeating. So I'm going to just kind of create, now what I'm going to try to do is create this long dash so it's about the same size for the next piece of the pattern. And then I want to make sure these short dashes are about the same size. And now we're going to kind of get to the end here where this dash maybe is a little bit longer, but I probably would stop there because if I put that dash here, it's going to look a little inconsistent and not centered. This is, again, an example of where using your eraser shield with that dot pattern can make this come out a lot more even. But that's fine. So now we've got a center line rather, two hidden lines that are representing the features on this view, let's say, and let's pretend we want to add some dimensions. Dimensions are also a thin line, but I'm also going to start off with construction lines and actually have a pretty good construction line there. This is where that construction line came in handy for me in more than one situation, it helped me locate the object lines. I'm also going to use it to locate my extension lines, but this one needs to be extended. And I need to extend this one over here too. And I need to set a distance, a consistent distance for my dimensions. So the first dimension off of the part, so I'm lining up my straight edge here with the edge of the actual part, should probably be just about to where the end of these longer tick marks are. And I think that's just about a 1/2 inch. So it's a 1/2 inch from the part. And I'm only going to draw that construction line to the first these two extension lines, because then the next dimension line is going to continue and be a baseline dimension from here to this point right here. And in this case, because I'm putting a second dimension line in, the distance from this line here to the edge of the straight edge is about 1/4 inch, and that's what I'll use to locate that second dimension line. So now I'm ready to put in my actual thin lines for all of these things. I'm going to start off with my extension lines, and you want to mind the gap, meaning make sure there's a gap between your extension lines and the actual object lines, because that's one of the cues that we have that tell us that the edge of the drawing is stopping and the dimension lines are beginning. Here we want to be careful to not extend that extension line too far. It's only going to go to the first dimension line we have here, and then we're going to go up to this one and do the same thing, minding the gap, have that extend to the second dimension line. Now we're going to add the actual dimension line itself, and I want to, just off to the side here, demonstrate the difference between architectural dimensions and mechanical dimensions. So an architectural dimension, both the dimension line and the extension lines extend past each other, and then you define where your dimensions are going from and to with what's called an architectural tick mark. That's what we have here. A mechanical dimension, you define where you're going from and to with arrows, and you can see how I'm drawing these arrows as narrowly as possible on the ends of the lines, because as soon as you see that, we can see that this dimension is going from extension line to extension line. Also, where the dimension goes is a little different from mechanical to architectural. So on a mechanical dimension, you want the dimension centered with the piece of the dimension line broken out. And what I've drawn here are two guidelines, a bottom and top guideline, to control the height of that dimension. So if I put in the dimension, let's say this is 1.5 inches, I'm being careful to make sure that the numbers are hitting both the top and bottom guidelines to make that those numbers and letters consistent. For architectural dimensions, you do still need to draw a top and bottom guideline, but the dimension is above the dimension line, always above it. So, and we always read too, if we have architectural dimensions that are going this way. The two ways that you read architectural dimensions are from this position, like this on the page, and then you're always going to turn the page to the right clockwise, and that's how you would position your dimensions in that direction. Architectural dimensions follow the direction that the dimension is going in, whereas mechanical dimensions are always going to be in this horizontal position, even if you have a mechanical dimension Let's do a mechanical dimension on this side. Going this way, you would erase and you would put your guidelines here this way and write in your dimension, making sure they hit the guidelines. So see, this is unidirectional. They're always going to go in the same direction with mechanical, but in architecture, you're going to get that. Okay, so those are the differences. So we're calling this a mechanical drawing, certainly. So these are going to be, I'm just going to pull that center line back a little bit. These are going to be our dimension lines that just touch the inside of those extension lines. They don't extend past. Put those arrows in there. Do not bother to fill in these arrows. They never look good when you do that. So just do what I'm doing here, which is creating the little arrows. And then you're going to erase out the middle. Put in your guidelines. Oh, my lead got a little bit too big. There we go. Put in your guidelines. And I know I'm kind of doing this fast. I'm eyeballing. You want to be better about measuring this exactly so that your guidelines end up being the same distance apart throughout. I'm just kind of, the guidelines are the things that need to be in there. You want to make sure that they're there, and the consistency in their height from one to the other should be exactly the same. So when you look at those dimensions and we put a dimension like 4, and we'll say this is 3.75. When you look at those two dimensions, they look the same size. And then they're, as from another lesson, you know the shape of all the numbers and letters have to follow that ANSI single stroke Gothic text type. Ooh, say that fast. So there are your lessons. I think this pretty much covers what you need to know to get started on the orthographic projection drawing and having an understanding of how to use these tools.